God is just in the business of doing new things constantly. And he doesn't want you just to tell a faith story that was about a long time ago, but he wants to take that faith story that maybe was a long time ago, and he wants to make it new for you. And so I want to explore that together today. How do you take your faith that maybe is quite old and actually make it new? And if you've never given your life to Christ, if you've never been baptized, well, I just want you to hear us say today as a church, our God's not in the business of taking bad people and making them good people. He's in the business of taking dead people and making them alive people. He's in the business of new. That's the work that he does. And so this is from the very beginning of the story. If you have a Bible, turn with me to Genesis chapter 1. If you don't have a Bible, it's okay. You can follow along on the screens. That's a great place to follow along. Genesis chapter 1. How we doing? 10 o'clock? Doing good? Good. Hey, the Braves won the World Series. Just want to throw that in there. 25 years in purgatory, and it's just nice. So, I'm from Georgia, by the way. Okay, Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 1. So we've been in this series, the 7 blessings, and we've been walking through the scriptures to look at how this blessing that comes in Genesis to land, to people, gets carried out through Abraham, Noah. And so I want us to see how this is true from the very beginning of the story. Genesis chapter 1, starting in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Anytime my dad reads that verse, he's a huge baseball fan, he reads it in the big inning, which is like so lame, but I ruined that for you, so thanks, Dad. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over. Some of you just got that joke. It's awesome. It's like, oh, I get it. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the what? Over the waters. And so at the beginning of the story, essentially what's happening is, if the Bible is a movie, Spirit is there, creating, forming, hovering out of the water. And if you read the story, and this is true in Genesis 1, and it happens again and again, water acts as a character in the story. Water is essentially, it's not just kind of a throwaway or peripheral piece of the story. Water is a character in the story. And if you keep reading in this, up out of the water, God is going to raise up a new creation. In Genesis 1, up out of the water, God is going to do his creative work, and he is going to raise up a new creation out of the water. Are you with me? Out of the water comes the new creation. Land, space, time, stars, energy, people, all come up out of the water, this new thing that God is going to do. Now, if you know the story, you know what happens, and we're taking a 50,000-foot view of this. Humanity partners with evil, and sin enters into the world, corruption enters into the world, and God is going to send a flood to the earth. Genesis 6, 7, 8, 9 tells the story of a flood that is going to happen. Now, essentially what happens, and you maybe remember this from Vacation Bible School or from the Russell Crowe documentary that came out about this a few years ago. Again, that was a joke. It was not a Ken Burns. The Noah story, the ark story, God has created out of the water a new creation with life and with the world's this new place, bustling with energy. And God at the flood is going to engage in an act of uncreation. And the water comes to bring chaos into the order. It's a judgment on humanity. But if you remember, God preserves a remnant, a family, and he's going to say to Noah, build this floating zoo, essentially, and for 40 days and for 40 nights, the earth is going to be flooded. Now, at the end of this, Noah's wondering, is the flood over? And he's going to release a dove to determine, has the flood receded? This is the story. Genesis 8, verse 11. When the dove returned to him in the evening, now keep that in your mind, put that feather in your hat. When the dove returned to him in the evening, there in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the water had receded from the earth. He waited 7 more days. Now, all these numbers have significant meaning. We don't have time to do a deep dive on it. And he sent the dove out again. So again, here's the dove. But this time it did not return to him. The dove had found new land, new territory. Essentially, it meant the flood had receded. You could go out. God had allowed for humanity, this remnant of this family, this blessing to continue on through Noah. Now, typically when we tell the flood story, we get hung up on, well, did it happen or did it not happen? Which I would argue is to miss the point of the story. Because the story's not, well, did this happen? Is it literal or is it not? Essentially, every single one of us in this room, you have a flood story. There is a story in your life of how your carefully curated world, your created world, financially, your family, whatever it was, somewhere along the way, isn't it true? You have a story of a created order that got plunged into chaos and got ruined. You even use flood metaphors. You would say things like, well, you know, when the doctor called and said, I need to see you as soon as possible, it was like those 2 years, it was like we were just underwater. It's that story that you go back to, and maybe you're in one of those stories right now, and you can see the water lines on the walls of your life, and there's sort of this it just feels like you're underwater. And it's that moment, you sit with somebody long enough, isn't it true? They will eventually tell you their flood story of when their carefully curated world, financially, their job, their family, their health, whatever it was like it was like uncreation happened, and it was like, all of a sudden it was just chaos. Some of us, you even remember those moments where you were sending the doves out of the flood, trying to figure out, is this thing over? Some of us, that's after the last 18 months, you find yourself doing that now, like this, whatever we've been in. Like, is this, like the doves, is this thing over? It just feels like you're still under water. You sit with somebody long enough, isn't it true? They're going to tell you their flood story. That moment, it felt like everything financially, family, it all just crumbled. It all just fell apart. Some of us, isn't it true? You know people, they never got past their flood story. They constantly tell their flood story as if it is the main dominant story of their life. And it doesn't matter what you talk to them about. They'll always bring up that thing from 20 years ago or 10 years ago, as if the water lines are still there and they can't. You talk to them about anything, like, hey, I just bought a new 4Runner. They're like, you know who else is a runner? My husband, John, my ex-husband. They'll always tell you about the moment where their order got plunged into chaos. And the question of the flood, it's our question, is God going to raise up something new out of the chaos? Can the page turn, quite literally? Or is the flood going to have the last word over my life? Is chaos going to be the last word? And the great hope of our faith, the great hope of what we celebrate as Christians, is that our God is in the business of raising up new creation out of the chaos and out of the floods of our life. And new things can emerge out of the chaos, out of the thing that we thought was going to be the end of us and the ruin of us.